recorder is started. Get that screen up. X out of that. Little heartburn there. Little heartburn there, Trish. Hi, family. My name's Jamie. Very grateful, recovered alcoholic. And welcome to our 4-step workshop, which we only do every other month, but we'll get into that here in a little bit. So, what's one of the reasons that we do a 4-step? Because we got to Alcoholics Anonymous with a whole bunch of this emotional baggage, right? So this is just something that I just do as a little bit of a demonstration, because I don't know anyone who ever came to Alcoholics Anonymous without emotional baggage. I've known many people to say the only thing that's wrong with me is I drink too much. Nothing else is wrong with me. And if they stick around, they learn that they truly do have some emotional baggage. And some of that has been going on from the time we were little kids, right? Many of us come from broken alcoholic homes, a lot of drinking, a lot of dysfunction going on. Maybe even some stuff that shouldn't happen to us, and we drag that stuff from relationship to relationship to relationship. So this is a little example of that. You know, the first love I ever had, and she gave me a picture, and here I am 30 years later still dragging this picture around. Don't even remember what the woman looks like, but I got her picture because she was so special. And is it maybe causing problems in the current relationship? Me thinks so. So then I have the picture of the greatest love of my life, which is true. This is wife number 3, which can tell you how successful I was in relationships because of the emotional baggage. But it's true. This one we did until death did do part. So, most of us, is when we get in relationships, I didn't really seek somebody out for their brains. I was seeking them out for other pleasures, and it was generally the way they moved on the dance floor, or the twinkle they had in their eye, or something like that, which in my case, in my younger days, was always something of a sexual nature. And after a couple of years, we start to burn out and fry out, and we start to do some other things. Things aren't so quite as spicy in the relationship anymore. So I don't know about you ladies, but we men, we'll stop off down at the liquor store and maybe get some of those plain wrap magazines that they have in the rack, and what's happening with that is already mentally in my mind, I'm beginning to step outside of my relationship, and I'm starting to do things and mentally cheat in my mind. But I don't think anything's wrong, because I'm not getting any at home, so at least I'm getting something out of the magazine, right? And then maybe as relationships come along, maybe I go to inappropriate bar scenes, or we come into the world of cell phones and technology, and now we can text anybody on the planet who we've never met before, which oftentimes leads to other inappropriate things, inappropriate sexting, texting, pictures, all that sort of thing, which causes us more trouble in our relationship. So, the relationship that we're in currently, it doesn't fit in the box that I had planned the way that relationships ought to look like. So my box is either empty or it's full of a whole lot of garbage, one or the other. And I'm going from relationship to relationship, never getting rid of any of the emotional baggage, only collecting more as I go through the whole process. So now we're in this relationship, things are going well, and one day I'm drunk, you say something that makes me angry, and things start to escalate a little bit, maybe a little more violence or acting out or rage. So I pick up your favorite statue and I hurl it across the room. Of course, this little statue, his head is around here somewhere, but I have no idea where it is. But he is now known as the headless statue. And this was her favorite porcelain statue, who's now headless, all because of me and my drinking. So as I have gone through all these relationships, there's something that we never talked about. No, maybe you're the one that finally says something like, "You're nothing but a damn drunk." Uh-oh. We just we just started talking about the elephant in the room, which is my alcoholism. So I don't want to talk about that because it hurts and because it's painful. But the elephant in the room is part of what my truth is. So after I've gone through all of these relationships, I end up with what is my favorite t-shirt of all, because I'm so broken and battered now. So now I've got the t-shirt that's got the hole in the sole. And that's how I feel about everything in my life. And of course, the easiest way for me to wear this t-shirt these days is not put it on like a normal t-shirt, just throw the hole in the sole right over me. And when that's not working, and when I'm not feeling good enough, and I still can't deal with the pain, I resort to the old smelly blanket. Because the old smelly blanket is that thing that I wrap myself up in when I'm depressed and when I'm lonely and when I'm in emotional pain. And alcoholism is a disease of loneliness. It is a disease of deep emotional pain for so many of us. And unless we can find a pathway to overcome that old emotional pain, that old emotional baggage, and heal from it, the chances of us recovering and being recovered from the seemingly hopeless state of mind and body are not real good. So that's why we do a 4-step. So now Trish can unpin me, and now you guys know what the emotional baggage is all about and why we do it. And we're gonna kick it off. And this is a slideshow. It takes us about an hour and a half to get through it. So, hi Trish.
Jamie?
Your turn to speak.
It is. Buddy, I'm Trish and I'm an alcoholic. And welcome to the Lppbbsg Primary Purpose Big Book Study 4th Step Workshop. And we meet on alternating first Mondays of the month. And you can go ahead and visit our website. It's up in the upper right-hand corner, Lppbbsg, which stands for Lppbbsg Primary Purpose Big Book Study Group AA, with the .org. And that will have previous audio recordings of this workshop, our other workshop, the Foundations meeting, some of our speakers, and our book study, and a whole bunch of other great stuff too. But we're just going to move on to our 4-step workshop tonight.
And let's open this up with the set-aside prayer. God, please set aside everything I think I know about myself, the 12 steps, the big book, the meetings, my disease. But most especially, God, please set aside everything that I think I know about you, so that I may have an open mind and a new experience with all these things. Please let me see the truth. And let me apologize to all of you. I've got a broken partial, so I'm missing my 2 front teeth. So I'm going to talk a little funny tonight, and when I get it back tomorrow, I'll have to learn how to talk all over again with 2 front teeth. So just get that out of the way right off the cuff.
You didn't get your 2 front teeth for Christmas, but almost for New Year's.
Yeah, almost.
Our preamble. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is the desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution. does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety.
Please keep in mind that this is a workshop. We will be discussing some real-life examples of what could be difficult for some. While questions are encouraged for clarification, we do not expect specific discussion to encroach on topics that would be saved for your sponsor or for a one-on-one conversation. Feel free to take notes as we go along. This workshop should not be used as a platform to start sharing your fifth step.
And please use your notebook to write down the slide number that's in the lower right-hand corner of each slide. That way we can take questions at the end. We'll know which slide to go back to and refer to for further clarification or to further your understanding of that slide.
So we always like to start before we jump right into step 4 of giving a little foundation about our program and the first 3 steps. So let's talk about our triangle for a second. Many people talk about unity, service, and recovery, but the truth is in Alcoholics Anonymous, our recovery comes first, and it is the foundation of everything. And it is the foundation of our triangle, and it helps hold the other 2 legs in place. So recovery and mind represents the mind. Found in the Big Book, pages XXV to page 164, set of 12 spiritual principles that are the 12 steps. Have you continued to actively take the 12-step process outlined in the Big Book? Unity represents the body, found in the fellowship, set of 12 spiritual principles found in the 12 traditions. Do you have a group that you are committed to? Is your group committed to the 12 steps? And does the group live by the 12 traditions? And service and spirit, found in carrying the message, set of 12 spiritual principles found in the 12 concepts. This applies from the group level through the service structure all the way to GSO. Are you working with others and taking them through the 12 steps?
While this is a 4th step workshop, it's always good practice to review the foundation of steps 1, 2, and 3 before beginning. Therefore, we will be reviewing some hot spots to be sure that the foundation is intact, which leads into step 4.
I always forget that slide's there, and that's why I always talk about it before, I think. Through the information we read in the doctor's opinion, along with the first 44 pages, we are given the information we need to self-diagnose our alcoholism. Only 51 pages in all lead us to this decision. This is our step 1.
And I'm pretty sure there is a slide in a couple slides gotten to yet. But if there's some information on one of these slides that you're interested in, please feel free to take a screenshot of it so you can have it for future reference.
Absolutely. Screenshot, hold your phone up to it, take a picture, whatever you need to do.
So, step 1, from our book Alcoholics Anonymous on page 30. We learned we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. This is the first step in recovery. The delusion that we are like other people, or presently may be, has to be smashed.
I love that smash. Bang! That was a tricky one, Trish. Being convinced from page 60 of our book, and we take a little bit of a look at the ABCs in a slightly different light here. A, am I convinced that I am an alcoholic and that my life is unmanageable? Step 1. B, am I convinced that no human power could have relieved my alcoholism? Still step 1. And C, am I convinced that there is a power greater than my own power that can and will relieve my problem? A and B. Step 2.
And from our book on page 50 and 51. And we're looking at We Agnostics right now, and this chapter gives us a pathway to let go of our old ideas and our old beliefs And it helps us to open our heart and our mind to finding new beliefs that we can live with and move forward with. This happened soon after they wholeheartedly met a few simple requirements. Once confused and baffled by the seeming futility of existence, they show the underlying reasons why they were making heavy going of life. Leaving aside the drink question, they tell why living was so unsatisfactory. They show how the change came over them.
And moving along, again, still in our big book, I always say, how did they know how to write about me 35 years before I was born? But here it is, a life based on self-will. Now in the book, in meetings, we always read this in the we, but here we read it in the first person because I'm trying to put myself into the book. I'm trying to see how the book relates to my life. So, from pages 60 through 62, if my arrangements would only stay put, if only people would do as I wish, the show would be great. Everybody, including me, would be pleased. Life would be wonderful. In trying to make these arrangements, I may be sometimes quite virtuous. I may be kind, considerate, patient, generous, even modest and self-sacrificing. On the other hand, I may be mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest. But as with most humans, I am more likely to have varied traits.
What usually happens? The show doesn't go off very well. I begin to think life doesn't treat me right. I decide to exert myself more. I become, on the next occasion, still more demanding or gracious as the case may be. Still, the play does not suit me. Admitting I may be somewhat at fault, I am sure that other people are more to blame. I become angry, indignant, self-pitying. What is my basic trouble? Am I really not a self-seeker even when trying to be kind? Am I not a victim of the delusion that I can wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if only I manage well? Is it not evident to all the rest of the players that these are the things I want? And do not my actions make each of them wish to retaliate, snatching all they can get out of the show? Am I not, even in my best moments, a producer of confusion rather than harmony?
I am self-centered, egocentric as people like to call it nowadays. I am like the retired businessman who lolls in the Florida sunshine in the winter complaining about the sad state of the nation. I am like the minister who sighs over the sins of the 20th century. I am like politicians and reformers who are sure all would be utopia if the rest of the world would only behave. I am like the outlaw safecracker who thinks society has wronged him. I am like the alcoholic who has lost all and is locked up. Whatever my protestations, am I not mostly concerned with myself, my resentments, my self-pity? Selfishness and self-centeredness, that, I think, is the root of my troubles. Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. I step on the toes of my fellows and they retaliate. Sometimes they hurt me, seemingly without provocation. But I invariably find that at some point in the past, I have made decisions based on self, which later placed me in a position to be hurt.
So my troubles, I think, are basically of my own making. They arise out of myself, and I am an extreme example of self-will run riot, though I usually don't think so. Above everything, I must be rid of the selfishness. I must, or it kills me. God makes that possible. And there often seems no way of entirely getting rid of self without his aid. I've had moral and philosophical convictions galore, but I could not live up to them, even though I would have liked to. Neither could I reduce my self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on my own power. I had to have God's help. This is the how and why of it. First of all, I had to quit playing God. It didn't work. Next, I decided that hereafter in this drama of life, God was going to be my director. He is the principal, I am his agent. He is the father, and I am his child. Most good ideas are simple, and this concept was the keystone of the new and triumphant arch through which I will pass to freedom.
Now that the book has given us ideas that our problem is based in self, we need a pathway toward finding out what our own selfishness, self-centeredness, fears, and delusions are. This comes from the process of the 4-step inventory. The first 3 columns are centered around our resentments and how they affected us. Everything after that looks at our own thoughts, actions, and patterns. This is a discovery process of who we have become.
How? First of all, I have to quit playing God. Why? It didn't work.
That's a fact, Jack. Boom shakalaka laka, boom shakalaka. Sorry, just had to do that. So we come to our 3rd step prayer on page 63, and as we go through the prayer, I'd like to consider something. When I'm asking God to relieve me of the bondage of self and take away my difficulties, is it possible that I'm asking God to relieve me of all of the stuff that we just read about the writer, the actor, and the director, and the selfishness and self-centeredness and the fear? So, our 3rd step prayer: God, I offer myself to Thee, to build with me and to do with me as Thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do Thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of Thy power, Thy love, and Thy way of life. May I do Thy will always. Hang on before you move on, Trish. So, in chapter 5 it says, we stood at the turning point. We ask His protection and care with complete abandon. That turning point is step 3. So, is that what I'm doing through the beginning of this prayer here? Am I standing at the turning point and unreservedly giving myself to God? That's how Bill talked about it in his story. I unreservedly gave myself to my Creator as I then knew Him. And to those I would help with Thy power, Thy love, and Thy way of life. May I do Thy will always. I look in this room and we have sponsorship here. Isn't that exactly what we're doing, is sharing our story and our lives and how we got over our drinking with those that we begin to work with so that they can do the same thing? Okay, Trish.
Let's take a quick look at the 3 aspects of a relationship with God from page 62. The director and the actor. A director runs the show. The actor listens for direction. On my own, have I failed to provide what I need to be okay? And am I ready to make the decision that hereafter God will direct my life? And principal and agent. An agent represents who the principal or employer would have them be. Have I failed to be the person that I would have me be? And have I failed to make others who I need them to be? Am I ready to make the decision that hereafter I will represent who God would have me be? And father-child. A child trusts their father can provide what they are incapable of doing on their own. Have I failed in directing my life on my own power? Am I ready to make the decision that hereafter I will trust that God will provide what I need?
So, this is your workbook. There are many 4-step workbooks available. However, the 4th step was never meant to be a check-the-box kind of inventory. And there are some out there, Hazelton and some others. The instructions in the big book always say, referring to our list, which we have written out in detail. There's one workbook out there that has about 167 questions on why I'm powerless. Some workbooks can get run you down a lot of rabbit holes. I find it easier to just stay with what the instructions in the big book give us and pen to paper.
So before I begin, I'm going to do something like this. God, please help me see the truth about the things in myself which have been blocking me from you. I want to make sure that I'm inviting God into the process of this fourth step in self-discovery so that I know I'm discovering what God wants me to see and not just reinforcing all that emotional baggage that I want me to see.
So, if you take a look in your big book, this is page 65. Of course, we're only going to show you the first two columns first, and we'll explain why. And we are usually as definite as this, and this is where we begin to start with our resentment list. First two columns, we work each column from top to bottom. List all of the names first, and then we go back and we list all the causes. So the examples that Bill gives us are, I'm resentful at Mr. Brown, Mrs. Jones, my employer, and my wife. The cause, well, Brown's attention to my wife. He told my wife of my mistress, and Brown might get my job at the office. Mrs. Jones, she's a nut. She snubbed me. She committed her husband for drinking. He's my friend, and she's a gossip. My employer, unreasonable and unjust, overbearing, threatens to fire me for drinking and padding my expense account. And my wife misunderstands and nags me. She likes Brown, and she wants a house put in her name. Boy, I can see all kinds of scenarios set up there.
And the reason we go from top to bottom is if I work across and I'm looking at Mr. Brown and all those causes of why I'm resentful at him, that anger's going to come up, that resentful, those nasty, yucky feelings that I don't want to have to deal with. And I'm going to get so caught up in the feelings that I'm not going to move on. So if I have my list and I can see it's only 4 or 5 people, it might be 6 people. When I get into those causes, it's not going to be so difficult to move on because I know the list isn't going to be that long. I know there are sponsors out there who'll say, you have to have at least 50 or 70 people on your list. That's not true. You're resentful at who you're resentful at. And if you ask God into the process, you'll know who needs to be included on that list. And it's not any given number that anybody else is going to give to you. So, after we complete the first 2 columns, then we're working top to bottom, then we're going to add that third column. And we're still working from top to bottom again, so we don't get so overwhelmed and say, I'm never doing this anymore, because I can't tell you, in the process of my first one, I can't tell you how many times my notebook went flying across the room because I just didn't want to deal with the pain. So, the third column are the 7 areas of self, which begin on page 64. And those are self-esteem, pride, ambition, security, personal relations, sex relations, and pocketbook. So I'm resentful at Mr. Brown. I already know the causes. We did that on the last screen. What does this affect? It affects my sex relations, and it affects my self-esteem. And there in that second row is that, in parentheses, is that word fear, which is a whole other inventory that we'll get to in a couple of slides from now. Then I go down the list, Mrs. Jones, and I already have her causes. What does that affect? That affects my personal relationships. It also affects my self-esteem, and there's that word fear again. My employer, I have the causes. What are those resentments, those causes affect? It affects my self-esteem and fear, and it affects my security. And I'm resentful at my wife. There's the causes, and what do those causes affect? It affects my pride, it affects my personal sex relations, and it affects my security, and there's that fear again.
All 3 of those columns are lies, I tell you, lies.
But they're my feelings.
But feelings aren't facts.
And feelings aren't facts. But feelings are valid, and we need to find out where they come from and then decide, what am I going to do about it? What am I going to do with all these feelings? How am I going to work with them? And that's where this fourth step comes in.
There are people who will look at the chart on page 65 and say, this is the fourth step. However, there is more work to do. The full directions start on page 65 and end on page 71. Page 72 states, we have been trying to get a new attitude, a new relationship with our Creator, and to discover the obstacles in our path. Causes and conditions, page 64. Without these other columns, I am missing most of my discovery process. The following slides are the rest of this process.
So before each fourth column, I want to consider in paragraph form, how have I done the things I've resented in column 2 to the person I resented in column 1 or others? Or in other words, I'm resentful at you because you did something, but when I look at me, I've got to look at how often did I do this same thing to you or to somebody else. And then comes that sentence on page 66 in paragraph 4. This was our course. We realized that the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick like ourselves. And after considering this, I'll say the fourth step prayer from page 67. This is a sick person like myself. How can I be helpful to them? God save me from evil. Thy will be done. And by saying this prayer, by asking for God's will and for asking how can I be helpful, I can't be helpful and angry at somebody at the same time. Doesn't really work that well. But by asking God, how can I be helpful to them? Is this not the beginning of forgiveness? Because if I'm carrying that resentment, if I'm angry, the last thing I want to do is to be helpful to you. But if I can start looking at this relationship with the spirit of forgiveness rather than the spirit of anger and resentment, then I can start being willing to be helpful. So perhaps this is the beginning of forgiveness with that person.
So we're going to go back and we're going to take a look at here again of what it should look like in the written form. And at the top of every page we write, God, please let me see the truth about who I'm resentful at. And this is what the first column from page 65 should look like when completed, or columns 1 and 2 rather. These are individual resentments. Notice there are multiple resentments per person. And the reason this is important is when we're resentful at somebody, we're mad at them for everything under the sun, even stuff that they didn't do, because we have a tendency to bundle stuff. But when we start breaking resentments down of specifically what we are resentful at, and when we can forgive and let go of the smaller stuff, maybe by the time we get to the bigger stuff, it will be easier to let go of. So here again, we have Mr. Brown, Mrs. Jones, and my employer, and we just ran out of room to do the wife, so that's why we don't have the wife on here. So with Mr. Brown, we have 3 separate individual resentments. His attention to my wife is the first one. Second one, told my wife of my mistress. Well, I'd be pretty damn mad at Brown too if he told my wife of my mistress, and I'm not even married, so there. And 3, he might get my job at the office, so there's a threat to my security. So it's 3 separate relationships. Or resentments, pardon me. Mrs. Jones, she's a nut. She snubbed me. Oh, many of us, in my youth, we used to call it being stuck up, right? Or a soch. So none of us like to get snubbed. She committed her husband, and he's my friend. So she stuck up and she committed my drinking buddy. Oh my God, what a horrible woman she is. And then my employer, he's unreasonable and unjust, overbearing, and threatens to fire me for padding my expense account and drinking on the job. Maybe my butt should be fired, but I don't see that because I'm too much in my cups to realize it.
So, on the left of the page is what Jamie just read off to you. On the right is a blank page that we have made up in Word format that if you're interested in it, we can send it to you. Just pop your email into the chat and we will send them to you. And you'll get both, but the yellow page will be white because we don't want to kill your printer ink. So we'll have about 12 or 13 pages of examples, and then another 12 or 13 pages of the blank forms. And you can print out however many that you want, or you can just use a blank notebook and just keep turning your page, whatever works for you. But we're always going to have on the top, God, please let me see the truth about my resentments, about this part of my inventory, that part of my inventory, because it's always important to invite God into the whole inventory process.
So the 7 areas of self. I love this. The third column focuses on the 7 areas of self. These are found on pages 64 and 65 in the big book. Our focus will be on self-esteem, pride, ambition, security, personal relations, sex relations, and pocketbook. I ask myself, how do my resentments affect me in these areas of my life? Keep in mind that sex relations has nothing to do with the act of sex here. Rather, the focus is on male-female, or in today's world, same-sex relationships, or relationships with the partner of our choice. While pride is not listed on these pages, it is included in the 7 deadly sins, which is discussed in the 12 and 12. Step 4, page 48. It also ties very closely with self-esteem and gives me a different perspective on looking at myself. The 7 deadly sins are pride, greed, lust, anger, gluttony, envy, and sloth. Hang on before you move, change that slide, Trish. A lot of people will just take the sample diagram that Bill has, where it says sex relations, self-esteem, fear, and that's what they'll write. It's sex relations, it's self-esteem, it's fear. And they won't write into any more detail of what it actually is. And what we're going to try and show here is a little more in-depth detail of looking at those specific things in our lives as we go through the process, because it gives us a much greater chance of healing from it. Okay, Trishy.
Thanks. So this is what our paper would look like. And again, if you ask for a copy of ours, you'll get this out, and you'll also get a blank one. And at the top of the page will be written, but you can pray it, you can write over it, you can write it in several different colors, just a reminder to include God in the process. God, please let me see the truth. And it's the resentment inventory, and this is the instructions of using the 7 areas of self. And they're also on the upper left-hand corner of this page. The self-esteem, pride, ambition, security, personal relations, sex relations, and pocketbook. And we want to use 1 page per resentment, not 1 page per person. So in the upper right-hand corner, you'll notice it says, first name, Mr. Brown. First resentment, his attention to my wife. There were 3 different resentments for Mr. Brown. So when we're done, Mr. Brown's going to have 3 different pages. Because if we look at each resentment individually, it becomes easier to forgive for one at a time rather than trying to forgive for the entire bunch. A lot of times they all get tangled up together. But if we look at each resentment individually and work through one, forgive, ask forgiveness, It's easier then to move forward than it is to try to do per person when everything's all tangled up. So, the effects my. I'm going to keep columns 1 and 2 in mind, their name and what the resentments were, while I'm writing this third column. And that comes from page 65, paragraph 3, where it says, we consider it carefully. And I want to look at the third column and consider the opposite of each sentence, the opposite of what I write, to let the inventory reveal what my fears behind each of these 7 areas of self is. So while in the book it has the 3 columns, we're using this page for that third column instead. So that first of the 7 areas of self, self-esteem, we define that as how do I see myself, or how do I feel about myself? What is the role that I have assigned myself with this person? And I'm going to start sentences usually with I am. For example, if the resentment is his attention to my wife, I'm the best husband that she could have. Or, I'm the worst breadwinner that there is. Over all the way on the right-hand side in the black, I'm also going to list what fears are associated with this. What fears are associated with those things that I just wrote down. The fear of not being good enough. The fear of somebody stealing my wife. Moving on to the second of the 7 areas of self, pride. How do I think others see me or feel about me? Or what's the role that I have assigned myself in somebody else's life, in this case, Mr. Brown's life? And sentences usually start with others should or others shouldn't. For example, others should not pay so much attention to my wife. He should honor my marriage commitment. And the fears, the fear of being alone, the fear of abandonment. Your turn.
Yep, just trying to get my brain to engage here. So continuing with the 7 areas of self, and next we take a look at ambition. What do I want to happen here? Sentences start with I want. The example is, I want a healthy, happy relationship. Or, I want to be left alone, damn it. And so then we take a look at the fear associated with that. Fear of being alone, of losing everything, certainly impossible. Or maybe a fear of not ever having anybody and not having the type of intimacy that comes with a good, healthy relationship. Security. What do I need to be okay here? Sentences start with I need blank to be okay. Example, I need my wife to love and respect me. I need Brown to respect my marriage. Identify the fear. Being disrespected, being unlovable. You know, any of us who have ever cheated or been cheated on know the type of emotional pain that comes with that, and the type of insecurity that comes along with that as well. And it is very, very painful and very destructive to relationships. Personal relations, my deep-seated beliefs of how this relationship is supposed to look like. Example, wives trust their husbands. Friends should respect me, marriage, family. Identify the fear. Fear of not being accepted or not being respected. Sex relationships. My deep-seated beliefs of how real men and or real women are supposed to be. Sentences start with a real man or a real woman. Example is, real men don't pursue another man's wife. Identify the fear. Maybe that fear is abandonment. And my pocketbook affects my finances. Sentences start with no one should. Example, others should not go into my wallet without my permission. No one should go into my phone without my permission. Brown should not ask my wife to dinner and then ask her to pay for it all. And the fears there, obviously, financial insecurity. So why is my wallet and phone important today in today's world? You know, my wife used to say, "Oh, it's in my purse. Just grab it out of my purse," and I wouldn't. I had the respect for her to pick my purse, pick her purse up, and take it to her, and let her find it, because the truth is, I don't want to know what's going on in her purse. One of the reasons that our phones are very important, and yeah, we could be doing some unsorted behaviors that we shouldn't be. But how many of us pay our bills online today, or with apps, or Venmo, or PayPal, or something like that? So if somebody else gets into my phone and they decide to Venmo themselves $500, I'm going to be out $500, and I'm going to have a hard time disputing that, because it originated at my phone. So you know, I want that kind of privacy, and I also afford that kind of privacy and respect to others. What goes on in your phone ain't none of my business.
So again, the yellow side, what we just went over. The white side is our copy of the blank papers that we are happy to email out to you if you'd like a copy of these so that you can work on it on your own.
So put your email addresses in the chat and we will send them to you. You can make as many copies as you need. Fourth column worksheet. This is where I discover my defects of character and shortcomings. The directions are found on page 67, paragraph 2 in the big book. Use one page per individual. Resolutely look for the harms that I have done to others. List where I am to blame. This will be the foundation for my 8-step list. This form may need to be modified for institutions. I continue to recognize my fears. The directions for the fear inventory is found on page 68. And Tim, I don't know if you heard it or not, but if you put your email chat in the address in the chat, we'll be happy to send you out our work pages that we have, along with instruction pages.
And you can put it in just to me. You don't have to put it to everybody unless you feel like it.
That's right.
So our fourth column, again, at the top of every page, God, let me see the truth. And the realization in this column is, how have I done the things that I resented in column 2 to the person that I resented in column 1 or others? So I'm mad at you for doing something, but how often did I do that same, turn around and do it right back at you? So the first question I asked myself, where had I been self-seeking? And I want to look around that whole resentment. What did I do? Where was I to blame? What were my selfish actions and activities? Who did I affect? And who else did I pull into this drama? So I placed blame. I acted out. I called your boss to town. I said I was going out with my friends, but in reality, I was going out somewhere to get laid. Where had I been selfish? What was my selfish thinking while I was doing the self-seeking actions? My selfish attitudes were what? I demanded to get my own way. I was filing divorce papers in my mind while we were in bed. I had it all planned out. You were going to pay and I was going to cut you off.
Where had I been dishonest? What were the lies I was telling myself that resulted in my selfish thinking above? Where was I in delusion? I could find someone better. You would never be good enough. You didn't care about me and our family. Afraid. What were the fears that drive the delusions above? I was afraid I would be alone, even though I didn't want you. The children wouldn't have their other parent. I wouldn't be able to pay the bills, and we would be homeless. I feared for my safety or retaliation. The above fears drive the dishonesty that results in the selfish attitude behind the self-seeking actions. And boy, does fear ever dominate our lives.
Much more than I was willing to admit. So now we want to consider if there's any other fears that need to be added onto that fear list. And that's the fears we just looked at, plus that we worked on that right-hand column in those previous pages. And I want to look at that fear list and consider the opposite of each fear. And if it applies, add it to the list. Don't just look for negative fears, look for the positive ones as well. I fear being alone, but I also fear meeting another abusive partner. I fear being homeless, but I also fear having to move back in with my parents. I fear losing my job for the lies I told you when I was out. I fear my truth. I fear being successful because you're going to give me more work to do if I am. I fear having too many friends. And harms. Do I see the harms that I caused? Look around the resentment. Look at parents, friends, employers, and innocent bystanders. And those innocent bystanders are the people who I dragged in who had nothing to do with the situation. How many times did I have an argument with my husband and I went to work the next day and pulled aside a coworker and said, "Do you believe what he did?" Simply because I'm trying to get her to take my side and I'm trying to get maybe some more ammunition that she can see that I can add to the argument when I get home the next night. Something I didn't even think of that I can say to him that's going to continue that argument. Innocent bystander, had nothing to do with the fight, but I'm going to drag her in the middle of it anyway. I've harmed my spouse and children with my lies. I harmed my boss by not showing up for work, harmed my coworkers with that too. I've harmed my relationship with other family members. I've harmed my credit and financial status due to my selfish actions. And I've harmed friendships by complaining to my spouse about them.
Oh, and the fear inventory. So read the big book from page 67, third paragraph. Notice the word fear. 2, page 68, third paragraph. Outgrow fear. List all fears. Make a graph of columns. Or use the fear inventory template, which we'll show you. We will focus on the first column. Then we will look at each fear row individually. Take all your fears that you wrote down on your inventory and make one single list column. List each different fear only once in the first column. Why do I have this fear? Look around each fear. The next slide will show you how to follow the trail of fears by looking at the fears hidden behind each fear. Reference page 68. We reviewed our fears thoroughly. We put them on paper even though we had no resenting connection with them. We ask ourselves why we had them. Wasn't it because self-reliance had failed us?
So one example of what we refer to as the trail of fears, or the trail of underlying fears. And something that came up several times while we were working in the beginning of the inventory in that second and third column as we were looking at our fears was the fear of not being good enough. What's the fear behind not being good enough? If I'm not good enough, I'm going to be unwanted. And the fear behind being unwanted is I'm going to be alone. And I fear being alone. I don't want to be alone. Why do I fear being alone? Because I fear that emotional pain that I'll be sitting in if I'm sitting by myself. Because boy, my brain starts going if I'm sitting by myself. I fear sitting in that emotional pain because if I sit in that pain long enough, I fear I'm going to drink again. And I fear drinking because for me to drink is to die. And I fear dying because I fear the unknown. I don't know what dying means. And I fear the unknown because I fear maybe there is no God. And I fear there is no God, so I repeatedly trust self-reliance, even though I know self-reliance fails me. And if I'm not living in self-reliance, or if I am living in that self-reliance, I am not being God-reliant, and that's why I'm living in all those fears. But wasn't I trying to kill myself anyway? Is this the end result of the alcoholic insanity? And is this one example of how we could think that drink through? And when I'm drowning in my fears, am I just setting myself up for a drink?
Spotlight me real quick, Trish. So, here's the cool thing about fears. And not so cool thing about fears. We use fear as a blanket word, but yet we never actually define what the fears are. We just go, oh, it's fear. It's just fear. And we go on our merry way, but we never define what it really is. So it's like a blanket of fog. I'm sure most of us have driven in the fog at one time or another where it's so blinding you can't hardly see. And what do? We put the death grip on the steering wheel and we say, oh God, get me through this. Just get me through this. Just get me through this. And eventually that fog begins to lift. Well, we take fear and we throw it over everything. Oh yeah, it's fear over here and it's fear over here and it's, yeah, that's fear too. Until we become so paralyzed by our fear that we wrap ourselves up in it, we crawl back in bed and we pull the covers over our heads and we become paralyzed by fear. So the great thing about doing a fear inventory is we can know and understand where those fears come from, why we have them, so that they don't have that kind of power in our lives. And we can heal them, and we can come to realize how many of those fears are unfounded, how they are unrealistic and just based in some sort of illusion or delusion. Okay, Trish, thank you.
You are welcome. Back to the slideshow. And I'll go over this page real quick because it's the same thing we just did in that paragraph, but it's in the column, the table format, rather than in paragraph format. So this is what our fear template would be. The fear of being not good enough. All of the fears that I have would be listed up and down in column 1. And then I just work across each column, each fear. Why do I have this fear? Why do I have this fear? Why do I have this fear? And in a couple more slides, when we do the whole process with an actual resentment, well, you'll get to see what the whole thing looks like when it's filled out. Your turn.
Hey, let's talk about a little sex now, folks. I can step up to, there in the auctioneer's trailer and talk about this one. So, our sex inventory and our sex ideal from pages 68 and 69. Now about sex. Many of us needed an overhauling there, but above all, we tried to be sensible on this question. It is so easy to get way off track. Here we find human opinions running to extremes, absurd extremes perhaps. One set of voices cry that sex is the lust of our lower nature, a base necessity of procreation. Then we have the voices who cry out for sex and more sex, who bewail the institution of marriage, who think that most of the troubles of the race are traceable to sex causes. They think we do not have enough of it, or that it isn't the right kind. They see its significance everywhere. One school would allow man no flavor for his fare, and the other would have us all on a straight pepper diet. We want to stay out of this controversy. We do not wish to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct. We all have sex problems. We'd hardly be human if we didn't. What can we do about them? We reviewed our own conduct over the past years. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate? Whom had we hurt? Did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? Where were we at fault? What should have been done instead? We got all these down on paper and looked at it.
Well, we talk about this as being the sex inventory. And then we also said in the beginning, the it's not always about the act of sex, but how we interact with other people. So this can also be a relationship inventory. Now my button's not working. Okay, so the following are the directions for the sex inventory, and we just put it into question form, and it's taken right out of the book from pages 68 and 69. And like always, we always ask God to show us that we can see what he wants us to see before we get started. Number one, we read the big book from page 68, the fourth paragraph, now about sex, starting where Jamie just read, to page 70, the second paragraph, would be heartache. So you'll be reading a little bit more than what that one slide that we just had up. And then pray and make a list of the relationships that I've had in my life. And then 3, determine what can be done. Write a brief history of each relationship, including motives for getting involved, specific sex conduct, major points in the relationship, and how the relationship ended or how it is now.
I review my conduct and look at each relationship, answering the following questions, and there's 9 questions here. Where had I been selfish? Where had I been dishonest? Oh, and if there's any doubt, guess what, folks? This is in the book. Where had I been inconsiderate? Whom did I hurt, including those who were brought into our drama, including the innocent bystanders? Did I arouse jealousy? Did I arouse suspicion? Did I arouse bitterness? Where was I at fault? What should I have done instead? The answer to the last question is never, I shouldn't have gotten involved, because I can't change the past. I did get involved, and this has now become an experience of my life. Refer instead to what should I have done, or how should I have behaved in the relationship. Make sure to be especially complete with this answer, because it will be used later in writing my sex ideal.
So, in writing my sex ideal from pages 69 and 70. In this way, we tried to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life. We subjected each relation to this test. Was it selfish or not? We asked God to mold our ideals and help us to live up to them. We remembered always that our sex powers were God-given and therefore good, neither to be used lightly or selfishly, nor to be despised and loathed. Whatever our ideal turns out to be, we must be willing to grow toward it. We must be willing to make amends where we have done harm, provided that we do not bring about still more harm in so doing. In other words, we treat sex as we would any other problem. In meditation, we ask God what we should do about each specific matter. The right answer will come if we want it. God alone can judge our sex situation. Counsel with persons is often desirable, but we let God be the final judge. We realize that some people are as fanatical about sex as others are loose. We avoid critical thinking or advice.
Suppose we fall short of the chosen ideal and stumble. Does this mean we are going to get drunk? Some people tell us so. But that is only a half-truth. It depends on us and on our motives. If we are sorry for what we have done, and we have an honest desire to let God take us to better things, we believe we will be forgiven, and we will have learned our lesson. If we are not sorry, and our conduct continues to harm others, we are quite sure to drink. We are not theorizing. These are the facts out of our experience. To sum up about sex, we earnestly pray for the right ideal, for guidance in each questionable relationship, for sanity and for the strength to do the right thing. If sex is very troublesome, we throw ourselves harder into helping others. We think of their needs and work for them. This takes us out of ourselves. It quiets the imperious urge when to yield would mean heartache. The reading continues through the end of the chapter on page 71, encouraging us to review our work and then move forward towards amends. This also encourages us to continue to align ourselves with God so that He can remove whatever self-will has blocked me off from Him.
Now, the following slides are a real working example of a fourth step inventory, rather than using the potentially fictitious one that Bill had in the book on Mr. Brown. It follows the first person in column 1 all the way from the first resentment through all 4 columns, discovery along the trail of fears, and ending with the sex inventory and sex ideal. This takes us through the entire inventory process, starting on page 65 to the end of page 71, and completes step 4 on this one resentment.
So, and here again, our pages will come with most of the everything you see in blue and red writing already on it. You'll just have to fill in the blanks, and we'll send it to you in a white form so that your printer doesn't eat up all your yellow ink, so it doesn't look like it's all highlighted. So this is from a real live working resentment. Who's it against? It's against Dad. And the cause, column 2. He abandoned our family and left us with nothing and nowhere to go. Use the following pages to continue with one page for each resentment. Multiple resentments, again, will mean multiple pages per person.
So, looking at the 7 areas of self. At the top of the page I have prayed, God, please let me see the truth about Dad. And I'm going to look at self-esteem, the pride, the ambition, security, personal relations, sex relations, and pocketbook. So I'm resentful at Dad. I'm resentful at him because he abandoned our family and left us with nothing and nowhere to go. It's the person and the cause, what my resentment is. This affects my self-esteem. I am not good enough for him to stick around. He loved my brother more. And on the right-hand side, possible fears that go along with this. The fear of not being good enough. The fear of being alone. The fear of abandonment. This affects my pride. No father should be angry or violent to a 3-year-old. Fathers shouldn't leave their sons. And the fears there, anger, the fear of violence, the fear of being unlovable, and again, the fear of abandonment.
Is it up to me? Hang on 1 second. Okay. And again, continuing through the 7 areas of self in the 3rd column. This affects my ambition. I want my dad back. I want to be loved by my dad. I want my dad to be a role model. The fear associated with that is fear of abandonment, not having a role model, not having a strong father presence in my life. This affects my security. I need to feel safe to be okay. I need to feel love to be okay. I need to have shelter and food to be okay. The fears associated with that are homelessness, hunger, being hurt, alone, emotional pain, being unlovable. This affects personal relationships. Real men don't leave their families. Real men support their families. The fear associated, being alone, not knowing how to treat others. This affects my sex relationships. Real men don't bring strange people into their homes to have sex with their families, then leave to have sex somewhere else. Fears associated with that, abandonment, sexual abuse, molestation, not being safe, fear of not knowing what a healthy relationship is. This affects my pocketbook. Others should not threaten my home, food, utilities, finances, etc. Fear associated with that, homelessness, abandonment, going hungry, not being able to pay my bills. One of the reasons that breaking it down a little deeper than this, rather than just saying, oh, it's fear, and getting into a little more detail in our lives, is so that we can stop dragging on around the emotional pain from our past. How many of us have not been able to forgive a father, a mother, aunt, an uncle, a grandparent, or at least struggled with it, or maybe a sibling because of something happened? And while forgiveness does not absolve them of the harm that was done, it allows us to go through living our lives without becoming hostages to that harm that was done, and it allows us to be in freedom. I see you're yawning, Tim. We're not too much longer. Keep smiling, brother.
Moving into the fourth column, and this is where I start recognizing my patterns, my defects of character, and my shortcomings. And like on every other page, I have at the top of this one, God, please let me see the truth. And the realization, did I repeat or develop the same behaviors that I resented in column 2 to the person that I listed in column 1 or to others? Where had I been self-seeking? I acted out to get my own way. I put unreasonable demands on my father and mother and other family members. I knew emotional drama would always get me attention. I blamed you for all my problems. Where had I been selfish? I didn't care what others had to sacrifice to please me. I constantly demanded attention. When I didn't get the attention, I accused others of not loving me. And again, that selfishness is the thinking that then drives that action of the self-seeking behaviors. And where had I been dishonest? What were the lies I told myself? I would always tell lies. I would steal things. If I got in trouble, I blamed others. I had been dishonest for so long, I couldn't any longer see what the truth was. The biggest tragedy I see now is that I was lying to me.
And where had I been afraid? I was afraid of being caught in my lies. I was afraid that I wouldn't be loved because of my lies. I was afraid I would always be alone and not wanted by anyone. The above fears drive the delusions that result in the attitude behind our actions. Consider if there are any other fears that should be on the fear list. Consider the opposite of each fear, if it applies, and add it to the list. For example, I had a fear of abandonment or of staying in a toxic relationship, of being alone or filling my life with all the wrong people, fear of too many people in my life, or fear of being invisible to others, staying in a bad relationship, or of not being financially stable enough to be on my own.
And ors don't necessarily mean that those fears are either or, one or the other. It's just a way of separating that they could kind of be opposites of each other. So I want to look at both sides of any fear and see if the fear applies, like of the fear of having too many people in my life. I may also be afraid that I'm invisible to others and that people aren't going to even notice me. So looking at both sides of that fear. And here is that trail of fears again. And in that very first column, moving top to bottom, just like when we did columns 1, 2, and 3 with our resentments, I'm going to list what all of the fears were that I discovered on this entire process, starting in that column 3 and ending on that page that we just did. So not all of them, but on this page I have the fear of not being good enough, the fear of being alone, the fear of abandonment, the fear of anger or anger towards me, the fear of violence towards me, the fear of going hungry, the fear of being unlovable, not having a role model, and the fear of being homeless. once we have that column or columns, if it's more than one page, then I'm going to start working left to right, just like with the resentments and the causes. I fear not being good enough. Why? Because I fear if I'm not good enough, you're not going to want me. I'll be unwanted. Why do I have that fear? Because if you don't want me, I fear I'm going to be alone. And why do I have this fear? Because if I'm alone, I fear I'm going to be in that emotional pain. Why do I have the fear of having the emotional pain? Because if I have the emotional pain, I'm going to sit in it. And I know where my mind goes if I'm sitting in that emotional pain and I'm getting stuck and I'm growing roots while I sit there. Why do I have the fear of sitting in that emotional pain? Because I'm going to drink. If I sit there long enough and my roots grow long enough, I'm going to drink over whatever it is. Why do I have the fear of drinking? Because I fear death or insanity. I just don't know which route I'm going to take. Why do I fear the death and insanity? Because I fear the unknown. And if I fear the unknown, I fear that there is no God. And that's about as far as I can go with that. Because if I fear there is no God, that tells me I am living in self-reliance. I am not living in that God reliance or the reliance of the God that I found in steps 2 and 3. So now I'm going to come down to the next line or the next row. And what's there is the fear of being alone. And if I look up in the third column of that, I've already done being alone. So these red X's just simply mean stop. I did that one already. Because I have being alone here. I don't have to do it again. I know where it's going to end up. So then in row number 3, the fear of abandonment. If I have a fear of abandonment, what's behind that? The fear of being alone. The third time, the fear of being alone has come up. So the same fear coming up again, maybe something that I need to mark off somehow on my paper, because that's a pattern that I may need to discuss with my sponsor when I get into the 5th step. What does that fear of being alone mean? What does it look like to me? Moving down, the fear of anger. Why do I have the fear of anger? Because it's an unpredictable emotion. And the fear of that unpredictability is I don't know what I'm capable of when I'm angry. And what does that do? The fear behind that is putting me right back into that emotional pain, which we have in the first row. So here I have 4 different fears I've looked at. 2 of them have already popped up more than 2 times now. So really, we're just looking at what are the main fears. I found when I sat down and looked at my fears this way, I'm really a fear-driven person, which I never was willing to look at before. But when I lay them all out like this, there's really only 4 or 5 fears that really drive me. I just dress them up and put different names on them. But ultimately, they're really just 4 or 5 different fears. They may express themselves differently. But when I look underneath to what the true fear underneath is, it's only 3 or 4 or 5 of them underneath. That's where I need to focus. If I have that fear popping up in my life, something's going on, my body's reacting, my stomach aches, sweats, the clammy hands, and I know I've got that fear going on, I know it's one of those 5 that are popping up. I have to figure out just which one is it. So here's the rest of that column. Those are all the fears that we had lifted 2 pages out of all those fears because there were so many repeats. Back to sex.
Yep, back to sex. This is a real working example of the sex inventory from an actual resentment. The inventory is based a list made from the history of relationships from page 69. This is not necessarily based on a resentment list. This is an inventory on our own conduct in relationships and not based in resentment. So, here again, asking God at the top of every page to show us, and the name and the relationship, and write a brief history of the relationship. What were my motives for getting involved? He or she sure was cute. He or she sure was friendly. His or her smile sucked me in and made me melt. And my specific conduct in the relationship has been, my specific conduct was totally self-seeking, so I could feel better about myself. Others commented on how cute my boyfriend or girlfriend was. The interesting thing about it is we so often look to build our own self-esteem through others, but our self-esteem is truly an inside job for ourselves. So when our self-esteem and ego gets hurt or wounded, then we are devastated and disappointed. And is that really putting unrealistic expectations on what kind of power other people have in our lives? Okay, Trish, it's all yours.
Okay. The major points up in the relationship are, I don't play well with others. I always want my own way. Somehow it's always sexually motivated. I want control in every situation, whether it's sexual or not. I just want control. I would do whatever it took to keep you from leaving me. We'd fight over spending time with my family at holidays. Religion and politics would always lead to more fightings, and sometimes it would, depending on the relationship, it could add to a couple beatings as well. How did the relationship end, or how is it now? I walked away in anger because you didn't do what I wanted. Or I would act out in a way that you would leave. That way, I wasn't the bad one for leaving. And I got everybody's pity as well. The relationship on all of our parts was so sick and toxic that leaving was just a means of survival. And a quick footnote, after taking the steps and making amends, some of these relationships do heal and become healthy friendships. Not all of them, but some. But the important part is that I take a look at what I've done and I take a responsibility for my part.
And again, continuing, we do all the work at the top of them. In fact, the pages we send will have all of that up there. So, looking at each relationship and the answer to the 9 questions, reference page 69 for those 9 questions. 1, where had I been selfish, concerned only with myself? Hey, I wanted sex all the time. Or, I never wanted it. Or, I was demanding. When I didn't want sex, I pushed you away and rejected you. Or maybe I demanded unhealthy or unreasonable sex. Where had I been dishonest, deceptive, or fraudulent? I said you were the only one, but you weren't. I said I was going to work early, but I stopped by to see my girlfriend first. Number 3, where had I been inconsiderate, disregard for others? I did not consider your feelings. I did not consider your plans when I decided to stay late at work and went to see my girlfriend.
Whom did I hurt? And I want to look around this whole relationship. I hurt my spouse. I hurt our children. I hurt my girlfriend's or boyfriend's children. I hurt extended family members. I hurt my relationships at work when they caught me in my lies. How did I arouse jealousy? I openly flirted with others in front of my husband. I flirted with my friends' husbands in front of them. How did I arouse suspicion? How did I make you doubt my honesty? I lied about where I was going to be and when I would be home. I would constantly take phone calls or texts when I was home, but I wouldn't let you see the text. I wouldn't let you know who they were from. I might call you from his house and his parrot was squawking in the background, but I couldn't figure out how you knew I was there. Shush. How did I arouse bitterness? Deep resentment. I would leave our family gatherings to see his family instead. I paid his rent and neglected our family. I'd lash out in anger, always defensive. But he needs me! Where was I at fault? I would put our family second to his family.
And number 9, what should I have done instead? Don't write, never got involved in the first place. What should my behavior in the relationship have been? Make sure you're especially explicit about 9. You will refer back to this when writing the sex ideal. Reference page 69. I should have put my family first, been honorable and faithful, financially and emotionally supported my family. I should have been kind, loving, and tolerant. I should have taken care of others' needs before mine. I should have prayed and asked for God's help. And harms, write any specific harm that comes to you while you're writing. The realization that I caused deep emotional wounds in my family that may never be repaired. Many of these things could be considered abusive or narcissistic. In my experience, I have caused unknown and sometimes irreversible damage to others' lives. Prayer. God, I ask to help mold the ideal relationship in my life that I may be able to live by that ideal and live a healthy relationship with others. Amen. Hang on a second before you move on, Trish. That last harm part there of the deep emotional wounds in my family, that happened to me when I was 19 years old. I was married, had a little baby, and a real pretty girl at work, and her roommate asked me and some others to come over for a party. Nothing ever happened, but I told my wife that I didn't know how I felt, right? And that was the beginning and end, or the beginning of the end of that relationship. Had I had some emotional tools to work through uncertain feelings, who knows? We might be married 50 years now, but we're not. And I know that today, unfortunately, my actions of those days, they are still a point of pain for my first wife. They are a point of pain for my daughter, who's just turned 49 years old. While I do the best I can to make amends, boy, I sure wish I would have known all of this stuff when I was so much younger. Okay, Trish. The page we've been looking for.
Now that we have followed instructions and taken a look at ourselves and our conduct, let us now turn to page 69, paragraphs 3 and 4, and refer to the instructions in finding our sexual ideal. In this way, we tried to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life. We subjected each relation to this test. Was it selfish or not? We asked God to mold our ideals and to help us live up to them. We remembered always that our sex powers were God-given and therefore good, neither to be used lightly or selfishly, nor to be despised or loathed. Whatever our ideal turns out to be, we must be willing to grow toward it. We must be willing to make amends where we have done harm, provided that we are not bringing about still more harm in so doing. In other words, we treat sex as we would any other problem. In meditation, we ask God what we should do about each specific matter. The right answer will come if we want.
There are 12 steps and 12 traditions for recovery. There are 11 chapters in our book. Is it possible that the chapter 12 in your book will be your story? So how will it read? Finding yourself through this inventory could be the beginning of your chapter 12. It is now up to you to write your chapter 12.
And a quick 5th step note. The bottom of page 74 to the top of page 75 gives us the directions of how to choose who is to hear our 5th step. Its suggestion is that we choose someone that will keep our confidentiality. This could be a priest, minister, rabbi, or counselor, people who are bound by confidentiality by law. However, experience has taught us of the value of taking this step with another alcoholic, sponsorship. We believe that the advantage to this is that the experience of another alcoholic knows where to direct us through the process of recovery. We recommend that you prayerfully ask God to bring the right person into our lives to help us through this process.
We hope that you will continue to join us for our bi-monthly workshop, as this work is only a beginning into the truth about ourselves. It is our experience that when people return month after month with new questions, we all grow in effectiveness and understanding. We continue to ask God to mold us into the people He would have us be, so that we can help others to find their truth. Yours in service with love, Lppbbsg. And now we are open for questions. Wow, Trish, we did all that in an hour and a half. That was very good. So you guys can feel free to unmute, ask any questions. If you need us to go back to any slides, we will be